Hi, I'm Tim Belcher and welcome back to the channel. Check this out. This is a no stitch, no glue leather purse. It is simply two pieces of leather cut to a precise pattern and they fold or sort of weave together into the shape of a purse. And I've gotten to the point where I can make this in maybe 30 to 45 minutes. Technically this is laser cut. I use a laser to cut my leather. You could cut this however on a Cricut. You could cut it on a CNC with a drag knife. You could even cut this by hand with leather scissors and an X-Acto blade. The pattern's actually not that complex. However, there is a lot of technology behind the scenes generating it. So let me walk you through how I got here. This is how I made it. Okay, first things first. This is not my original concept. About a year ago, Jimmy DeResta released a no-stitch leather bag video where he came up with this idea of a tab and slot design to replace stitching in a leather bag. He designed a laptop bag and he did it by hand in Adobe Illustrator. And the laptop bag had a front and a back that was connected with a base piece, and he used the tabs and slots to close the sides. And in the end, he came up with a very nice looking, relatively simple to build laptop bag. And when I saw this, I had a couple of ideas immediately. Number one, he had the front and back connected to that base. I thought, if the tabs went all the way around, you could simply weave two pieces of leather together. My second thought was he was doing this in Illustrator, and you can see him adjust it manually throughout the video. But that meant he was doing a lot of the math for the layout in his head, and that's probably the reason he was sticking mostly to straight lines. I thought this is where a parametric CAD design like Fusion really comes in handy. If the tabs and slots were built automatically from math, I could then find a length of a path first and then generate the tabs automatically. That would sort of reverse the process, and it could somewhat easily follow more organic shapes, curves, like a purse. I don't mean to say this part was easy, because it wasn't. Now, I'm not going to cover this in too much depth, but once I finally had a reliable design, I can do all sorts of things. I can now change the height and width of a bag. I can change the shape of the curves, parameters drive the size and shape of the flap, and even the rivet locations. And for any of these changes, I can simply change the number of tabs to something that I think fits well for the design. And of course, also, the parameters drive the creation of the tabs and slots themselves. And both of those things need to change based on how thick the leather you are using actually is. So let me take you through a couple of iterations of the actual build process. The first one I made was this, a very, very thin, fabric thin piece of leather. And as a prototype, sort of a failure all the way around. I did like the shape, I did like the design. The stitching actually holds a little bit, even on this very, very thin leather. Has the integrated handles, literally two pieces of leather woven together. And this is my second iteration. This is made out of 4 to 5 ounce leather. It's got an integrated flap as well as the straps. It's got some artwork put into it. This is actually a Harry Potter themed purse for my wife. I come back to this over and over as one of the favorite bags that I've actually made during this process. But it was clear that there were some things that needed to be changed. The integrated straps had to go away for some hooks for an adjustable length strap. And we needed to change the size and the shape a little bit of the flap. I had another idea at this point. This is an early demo of size and shape, and it's pretty close to the final. It's also a test of laser engraving artwork on the front and back. This is a lot of artwork about our local town here, restaurant, road names, some trivia, her monogram, etc. But I had the idea to add a strip that goes around the sides and the bottom. A strip that the front and the back can both weave into, and that strip would give the purse more width, and it would also make it keep its shape a little bit better. Absolutely works. And in fact, I sort of like both designs. I like the 2-panel design and what I call the 3-panel design. So at this point, I'm fairly close to making some designs, but I feel like I need to go to school on how to design this so that it's both easy to put together and remains very strong once it's together. And this is another advantage of having this model driven by CAD and a parametric design. I'm able to make a ton of little adjustments each time until I got to a point where I thought it was fairly easy to put the purse together, but very, very strong once it was. Here, let me just show you a couple of things. So this is a simple example of how the tab and slot works. The arrow is too wide to go through the slot. It's actually 1/4 of an inch wide, 1/8 inch on each side of the arrow in those little insets. However, the top of the arrow is always designed to be just a little narrower than the slot itself. That lets us push it in and with a twisting motion seat it. Now it's important that the height of this slot fits the arrow fairly easily. You don't want that to be too tight. So again, to weave this, I'm going to start by putting one end in and then twist it, and I can actually grab the other side and simply pull it through. I'll do the same on the other side. And you'll see me quite often pushing here to seat it and to help push it through. And sometimes I'll even grab a tool and push on this side up near the tab in that direction. And that's it. Now it's very easy on a straight line. As you get to curves, sometimes it's much more difficult. I've had some questions about strength, and I could not easily pull this apart at all. There is this option of pulling it apart where I'm pulling from the very top of a seam, and at this point I only have that 1/8 inch of leather holding it, but even that is very hard to pull apart. I could, well, usually force it. If you want to get it back out, then you actually need to push this tab down and in to undo it. It's not the easiest thing, and you'll notice that I've marred the leather a little bit doing it. Simply wet leather down. That's the great thing about leather. Wet it down, push it back into shape, let it dry. It'll actually dry stiffer than it was when you started. And while we're here, let me give you a quick example of how crazy smart Jimmy DiResta is. I was 6 or 7 hours into making this model before I realized what that little section between the tabs actually does. This joint, because of that, is actually in tension. You've got tabs preventing the leather from moving out, and you've got the edges of the leather lining up to prevent it from going in. Absolutely insane to me that that little section was in his original sketchbook design before he ever cut a piece of leather. So in the pattern pack, there's going to be a test directory that has a version of this made for 4 ounce, 6 ounce, 8 ounce, and 10 ounce leather, so that you can take an offcut of your piece, cut it out, test it, make sure it's going to work before you ruin an expensive piece of leather. So on to the final design and what's in a pattern pack. We have one pack for the 2-panel design, just the front and the back, and that's one of the quickest and easiest to assemble. We have a large, we have a medium, and we have a small. And on this small is an example of the multicolor options that you could do with some of these bags. And I released them in a large, medium, and small option to sort of de-incentivize people to shrink or enlarge the actual designs. Remember, these patterns are built precisely on the leather of thickness that you're using. They're not like normal leather templates. And for each of these, large, medium, and small, there's 2 versions of the panel. One with a higher number of tabs, one with a lower number of tabs. And the number of tabs is purely an aesthetic choice. It's also a choice about how much work you want to put into each bag, because if it has more tabs, it's going to take you a little bit longer to assemble. There's also a 3-panel version, and that would be the front, the back, and that side strip or gusset that goes around the edge. And again, mostly an aesthetic choice, although this bag will result in something that is 2 to 3 inches wide at the bottom. Again, given your leather choice. We have that in large, we have it in medium, and we have it in small. And I mentioned early in the video that I cut mine with a laser. I have a fairly large laser. In fact, on this model, that strip, on the large version of this 3-panel, that strip's almost 34 inches wide. There are a lot more lasers that are not that big. The Glowforge, for instance, has an 11 by 19 inch bed. Some of the 50 watt and 40 watt lasers also share that same bed size. The problem with that size laser in this bag is the actual flap. That flap makes the back piece much too large to fit onto that laser. I thought about removing the flap, making it a separate panel, maybe something that could cement onto the back and fold over, and that would let a similar design be printed on those smaller beds. And then I realized I already had a way of attaching 2 pieces of leather without stitching. And this is what I call the small bed or the Glowforge model. It's slightly different than the 2-panel model. It's still primarily front and back. It's optimized for that bed side, so the height and width are optimized. This is a medium, there's a large and a small in that pack as well. However, the flap now attaches via the same tab and slot method as the sides. The flap on this one is fairly easily customizable in graphic software. You could take it, and as long as you leave the bottom of the flap the same, you could create whatever type of shape or features you want on your flap. So this is the small bed model. If you've got a Glowforge or one of those small beds, this is the only pack you need to buy. And then of course there's a pack that sort of has everything at a big discount. If you just want all the patterns for all versions, you can simply download that pack. And now I'm going to show you an overview of one of these purses start to finish. Okay, I have the patterns cut here, and as I said, I use a laser, so I've also wiped the edges with a damp cloth to remove a little of the char that is left by the laser. And I'm going to install as much of the hardware as I can here, and for me it's fairly simple. I use some 18mm magnetic rivet snaps. Links for everything I will use will be in the description and the docs of the pattern pack. You do need to buy a rivet setter for this specific type of snap and, of course, the rivets, but those are fairly cheap. And you could obviously get rid of my rivet holes altogether and put in whatever type of closure you like to use as well. This is the 2-panel version where the front and back have these 3/8" strap loops that both go through the same D-ring. So I'm going to attach the ring to one panel before I start, and then I'll set the second rivet on each side once it's assembled. And on the 3-panel version, that D-ring is attached to the base panel using a single rivet. I'm going to time myself here as we assemble this 2-panel version. I should say here that at this point I've made about a dozen or more of these designs, so I've gotten pretty good at it. In fact, for a while I was really trying not to use any tools to assemble them. I wanted the design to be easy enough to assemble that you could just use your fingers. I should also warn you that this is a no-stitch leather purse, not a no-work leather purse. You're going to find some tabs set really easily and some are really hard to get started as you enter or come out of a curve. You need to sort of form the bag as you're looking to get the tab into position. I often spray the inside of the areas that are giving me trouble with water to help me form and manipulate the leather. And sometimes it feels like you need a third hand to get it started. I'll use my belly or the table or try a different grip. You'll see me flipping this over and over to find that good angle. But I find with patience you can usually find the right grip and angle to get the tab in the slot enough to pull or push it through. And then I also found that I personally often just don't have enough patience myself. I put 6 of these together in one day during this design process, and at the end my thumbs really hurt. So now I often do grab those little pliers to help me pull that tab through. I even sometimes use a flathead screwdriver or some other push stick to help push that tab in from the side. And there's me using my belly as a third hand to try and get a particularly hard tab to set. And again, I've said this before, here's where it's very important that you've chosen the pattern for the right thickness of leather. You don't want to be struggling to get the tab started in a slot that's too narrow for the thickness. It makes the assembly a lot harder. I don't recommend that you choose a side that's too thick, but if your leather is 2.6 millimeters thick, then don't choose the 2.5, choose the 3, if that makes sense. You can obviously customize these all over the place. Not only did I use the laser to etch the leather in several of the bags I made, but I also made mirror engraved acrylic designs that I could then press into wet leather. Here, for instance, is a Hot Mess Moms Club graphic that I made for my wife. I am actually going to make some follow-up videos of my process there, but please explore and have fun with these. All in all, these should not be too difficult to assemble, and this one took me right around the 10-minute mark to weave together. Just a couple more steps. I'm going to put that second strap loop on each side through that D-ring for the 2-panel design and drive home a rivet. And I actually used just a clamped piece of a 2x4 to set that rivet against. I'll usually wet the back side of the leather around the flap area and then close the bag to let it dry. And that helps form that curved memory we want when we open and close the bag. And lastly, I'll just give it a once through and just push my tabs over into the sides and make sure the bag is set to dry in the correct shape. Well, that's it. It really is that simple. I want you to make this for yourself, for your friends, for your loved ones, but I also want you to make these if you're one of those small laser businesses, CNC businesses, even a Cricut business. I think something like this could be a great addition to your portfolio. If you're interested in these pattern files, they're on my Etsy shop. The link is in the description down below. Also, check out that original video by Jimmy DiResta. And if you found this helpful, hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.